The Edge of the Box podcast is sponsored by UltimateFan, the perfect blend of fantasy football and ultimate team. You use packs to build your side with great prizes to be won. Users, of course, must be 18 and over, and terms and conditions do apply. We have a unique referral code as well. If you sign up with TN1420, you'll get 500 bonus coins, and the bonus coins will be credited on Monday. So check out UltimateFan if you're interested, and thanks to the guys for sponsoring the podcast. Hello, welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast. I'm joined by Jonathan Wilson and George Elek to look forward to this week's Premier League action, and also because it's deadline day when we're recording, I imagine we'll do some transfer stuff as well. Jonathan, where are you?
I'm in Abidjan for the Cup of Nations.
Okay. Looks very Abidjan-y. I don't really know what Abidjan is, but it looks very Abidjan-y. You're in.
Yeah, I mean, basically these curtains tell you everything you need to know about Ivory Coast.
Yeah, and George, you're in the kitchen today instead of the office.
Yeah, it's deadline day, which means that my office is currently like a transfer war room, which wouldn't be conducive to recording a podcast. So yeah, that's where I am. But I do, interestingly, Jonathan, a friend of mine was out in Abidjan at the beginning of the Cup of Nations, and he was desperate for a pizza when he was hungover. So I used my Googling skills to find him a good pizza place. And he said it was one of the best pizzas he's ever had.
I've had a great pizza here. There's a place called Apollo Versailles.
Is it the same place?
It was called.
Let me find it. I have to find it now.
I mean, this is absolutely brilliant. But George saying he's tight for time, then he does talk about pizza for 5 minutes before we get started on the podcast.
I've eaten really well here. I had, I think, maybe the best chicken and chips I ever had last night. It was stunningly good.
Let's just talk about food for an hour. Let's attempt to start talking about the Premier League action and start with Arsenal against Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp going at the end of the season. You're one of the top industry journalists out there. Did you see that coming?
No, not at all. I don't think anybody did. And it's remarkable they kept it quiet from November, if that's when the decision was made. But I mean, I think it makes sense. I think knowing when to go is one of the hardest things to do. And I think it actually speaks incredibly well of him that he's recognised he's knackered and doesn't want to just keep dragging on. And I think you see with a lot of long-term managers that they do hang on too long. So you look at Wenger, you look at Klopp, and their careers essentially have two phases. Yeah. They have the really successful phase, then the phase it's okay. They win some FA Cups or they win some League Cups. They finish in the top 4 or top 6. But they're not the great glory years, and so it ends with this sort of sense of frustration. Well, that's not going to happen with Klopp. Whatever happens now, he's leaving. I mean, it may not be on a high. We'll see, but it's definitely with the club looking like they're back on the up again, and that's a very, very rare thing to leave. I mean, we said this of Ferguson as well. They just signed Kagawa and Zaha that summer. They just arrived. And we sort of thought, that's leaving a good legacy, and it turned out not to be the case. So it may be Liverpool are not in as strong a position as they appear to be, but the rebuild of the squad has at least begun.
Yeah, I think they sit somewhere in the middle of Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger leaving, George. I think it's probably the second toughest act to follow, whoever takes over from Jurgen Klopp, because like Jonathan says, he's going to be bowing out on a high. Arsenal had really regressed under Wenger, battling for the top 4 every season was not what they were doing at the start of Wenger's tenure. But for Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool, they are still in 4 competitions, could win a quadruple. Do you think he'll go out in a blaze of glory? I hope he does. I mean, if Aston Villa Football Club aren't going to win the league and the FA Cup, I hope Jurgen Klopp wins the first push.
Yeah, I think there is some glory to be had this season for Liverpool. They're currently second favourites to win the league. They're not far off going favourites if they continue their run of form. We talk here the day after they played against Chelsea, and I know obviously Chelsea's form this season hasn't been great, but there was a massive quality gap between Chelsea and Liverpool on Wednesday evening, where Liverpool were by far the better side. This is a Chelsea team who've probably performed best this season up against the better teams of the league. When you consider their games, Arsenal, Spurs, City, they've taken the game to those teams and done really well. So for Liverpool to wipe the floor with them as they did was very, very impressive. They are massively in the picture for the Premier League, for domestic cups, and also for the Europa League as well. So I think there will be a fairy tale ending at the end of the season. Whether it's all 4, we'll have to wait and see. I completely agree about, I think if Wenger had left, almost kind of a decade before he did leave, then things would have been very different in terms of his legacy. Klopp is leaving at the right time, but I'm amazed, when you consider how all-consuming being a manager is, especially when at the end of the season, when most of the players fly off to Dubai for a few weeks or whatever else. For a manager, you don't have that time. You are immediately, there is another, unless you are willing, and obviously Jurgen Klopp doesn't have a huge amount of sway when it comes to recruitment. But even so, you are never stopping in terms of what you're doing in preparing for the next season. It must be absolutely exhausting. I'm not here playing a small violin to Jurgen Klopp. He's, at the end of the day, got presumably one of the most rewarding jobs in the whole world. But at the same time, it's not a massive surprise to me that someone who's barely had a break over two pretty intense jobs is pretty knackered. So fair play to him for taking the time to step away when not only things are going pretty well, but this is like a new Liverpool team that could be very dominant for years to come.
Should say other holiday destinations are available, not just Dubai. Footballers, maybe 3 or 4 of them do go to other places other than Dubai. Jonathan, who do you think is going to take over? Xabi Alonso, he's staring the job in the face, really, isn't he, for what he's done at Leverkusen over the last 18 months, still unbeaten this season.
Yeah,
at the time of recording.
The timing seems perfect for him. I think he's been very sensible in working sort of in the background a little bit in Spain first, then taking the Leverkusen job. He sort of he's gone through an education that maybe some high-profile English midfielders haven't gone through. And the odd thing this season is Bayern aren't actually doing that badly. Their record's pretty good. I think there's only 4 games in which they've dropped points, and yet Leverkusen is still top of the league. So given the sort of football that Leverkusen are playing, given Xabi Alonso's links to Liverpool, it looks perfect. Whether he would think it's too big a leap at this stage, I don't know. But after 2 seasons at Leverkusen, I guess that probably is time to test yourself. If not him, De Zerbi seems to be highly fancied. I think that game between Brighton and Liverpool in November, was it, the 2-2 draw? I think that you sort of saw the mutual respect between De Zerbi and Klopp. You saw that there were certain similarities of approach, not exactly the same, but the fact they both want to win the ball back out the pitch. There's enough there that you can see De Zerbi developing Klopp's side. It's not going to be a complete rebuild. So they do seem the 2 obvious ones, but these things are so contingent on timing that if Brighton suddenly plummet down the table and end up sort of 15th, 16th, and they're not on a good, I think, 3-16 they've won in the league, Brighton, at the minute. Yeah, great. It's not inconceivable that run continues, and if they go out of Europe, that suddenly De Zerbi doesn't look as attractive. So hopefully Liverpool are wise enough to look beyond immediate form. But it would appear to be Xabi Alonso's to turn down at the moment.
I guess as well, like Real Madrid, I know they're not going to be looking for a new manager next season. Bayern Munich might not be either, but could be. He could end up at one of his other former teams. If it's people would say maybe it's too big a job and he needs another job in between. I would wager that if he didn't end up at Liverpool, he'd end up at one of those 2 clubs.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Steven Gerrard is a good example of this, where had Jurgen Klopp decided to do this when Steven Gerrard was doing a very good job at Rangers or even after that first season at Aston Villa, the chances are Gerrard would have been the next Liverpool manager, which now, when you think back to that, is absolutely ludicrous. There's absolutely no way he would be anywhere near an elite job now. This football is fickle in terms of what jobs you can take. And I think for Xabi Alonso, the evidence at the moment to hand suggests that he's very good at this. But I don't think he's necessarily in a position where he can just say, well, no, I want to carry on for doing a couple more years and learning my craft here. This is a huge job that's coming up this summer, where the potential is there to build or continue a legacy that's already been built by Jurgen Klopp with a fan base who already absolutely adore you. He seems clearly the obvious candidate for me. There is just a matter of trying to win the Bundesliga this season. And I think it's unlikely that we'll see Xabi Alonso commit to anything beyond the year whilst that is still a possibility. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear anything on this until kind of April, May time at the earliest. But surely he's got to be the number 1 candidate.
He's definitely the favourite, isn't he? He's the one that you expect to take that job. Let's look more towards the actual game now. Arsenal against Liverpool this weekend, Jonathan, and Liverpool were in rampant form, except for Darwin Nunez against Chelsea last night. 4-1 winners, and is no denying that the star of the show was Conor Bradley. Trent Alexander-Arnold on the bench, Jonathan. I mean, what are they feeding their right backs in that Liverpool academy? Because he looks some prospect, doesn't he?
Oh, he really does. I think we live in the golden age of the right back. I don't think right backs have ever been as good as this.
No.
I think John Vialli said that the right back was almost invariably the worst player in the team. But left backs tend to be left to their own devices because of a few left-footed players. But if you were right-footed and good at defending, they turned you into a centre-back. If you were right-footed and good on the ball, they pushed you into midfield. So the right back was the bloke who was left over at the end. But yeah, that was 25 years ago, and the world is clearly a very different place now. It used to be the attacking fullback was always the left back. If you think back to when attacking fullbacks begin in the 60s with Giacinto Facchetti at Inter, or Silvio Marcelini with Boca in Argentina, or Nilton Santos, I even cited earlier, winning the World Cup with Brazil in '58, they were always left-footed players, always playing on the left. Well, now both fullbacks, and I guess it's been a thing over the last 20, 30 years that we've seen fullbacks become more and more attacking. And maybe now this is the time when Alexander-Arnold makes the move into midfield permanently. Maybe this is the push that they need. And Liverpool do need, if you're looking at that squad, and we're talking about the rejuvenation of that squad, the one area where you'd say that they really do need somebody is at the back of midfield. So if Alexander-Arnold can learn to do that, and he would appear to have the skill set, and that's the sort of player he was when he came to at youth level, then maybe they kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah, feels like they've got a lot of depth in defence now, George, with those players coming through. Conor Bradley, I've been impressed with Jarrell Quansah as well. When he's played, I've liked the look of him at centre-back. We talk about managers leaving teams in good places when they leave. Suddenly, over the last maybe 3-4 weeks, it feels like there's a batch of academy prospects coming through in that defence as well. And suddenly, they look really strong in that area with a mixture of experience and youth.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Bradley's form is going to see him, stake a claim to be a pretty regular right back, and as we say, it's going to change the way that Trent is probably used from now on, because he's absolutely the modern day right back. We saw him have an amazing season last season at Bolton in League One. Mad now to think that Bolton last season in League One had both James Trafford and Conor Bradley in their starting 11. How many millions of talent is that now? But he was quality. He was one of the best players in the whole league. He's someone who gets up and down the flank really well. The goal we saw him score against Chelsea yesterday is all him. He gets into loads of goal scoring opportunities on that right hand side as well, and has a bit of finishing ability across the keeper to pull it off. You're right with Quansah, such a classy ball playing defender who is right in that mould of what all kind of elite clubs want from their centre backs. Definitely really exciting at the moment for Liverpool to see not only the players they brought in the summer settle so quickly, but also the players who they've developed themselves. Even players like Curtis Jones who continue to improve.
So
I still think doesn't get anywhere near the amount of praise he should do. He should be on the plane in the summer, and he's not even getting a mention for it. An incredibly exciting time to be a Liverpool fan.
Yeah, Joe Gomez is suddenly filling in everywhere and looking great as well, isn't he? As well, left back, right back, centre back on occasion. Jarrell Quansah reminds me a little bit in some ways of Matip, just in the way he progresses the ball. So maybe a ready-made replacement there. All that we've just said about Conor Bradley, though, Jonathan, I guess he won't play in this game.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, you wouldn't know because you're not Jurgen Klopp, but I feel like he won't play in this game.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you've played that well and you're in that sort of form, do you really want to drop him? I don't know. I think I'd say it's a coin toss. The way that you introduce these players, when they suddenly come in and suddenly play like that, to when they're in that kind of form, and it's against Chelsea. Okay, it's not the best team in the world, but equally it's not Bolton or Sheffield United. It's a proper team, and he's been arguably the dominant player on the pitch. I don't know. I'd quite fancy that matchup against Martinelli if it is Martinelli, a player whose form isn't great. I'm not sure. I mean, it depends to an extent on Alexander-Arnold's fitness as well. Whether he is fully fit. But yeah, I don't think it's an obvious call at all.
I'm thinking on the basis that Trent's ended some games in midfield, but he hasn't actually started a game in midfield yet, I don't think, for Liverpool in the Premier League. So I feel like in a game of this magnitude, it would be quite bold to try something new for that game.
Do you not think did they not just play the same team?
I don't think you can leave Trent out of this game. I wouldn't have thought.
Do you not?
No.
Don't know.
Trent's form before he got injured, Trent, everyone was raving about Trent, weren't they? And how good his form was and how well he was playing. I wish that thumb would stop coming up whenever I move my hand. Do you get what I'm saying though? To do it in a game of this magnitude, I just feel that would be such a bold call. But then again, Jurgen Klopp, he is a bold manager, and Bradley actually came on and played against Arsenal, didn't he, in the FA Cup?
But I think
played very
really
well.
To change it.
Yeah.
I think that'll be unchanged.
You have to put Trent in. Let's talk a little bit more about Liverpool because we all would have watched them last night. I'm sure Jota's just come in for Salah and basically just picked up where Salah left off. George, he's not the same type of player. They're not even playing in the same position. But I did say on another show that I would back Jota to score probably as many goals as Salah in a run in the team, and actually he's doing it so far.
Wow. I mean, that's a big call as well.
I'm not saying over a sustained period of a 38-game season, but I'm saying for four or five games he's coming for. Jota, I reckon's output, well, he is. He's scoring.
I know you don't get the thumbs up for that. The magic thumb that tells you when you've done well hasn't appeared.
I actually do the thumb, though. Nothing comes up. But when I move my hand,
I was surprised when I was reading the running order this morning that the front player that was chosen to discuss was Jota rather than Darwin Nunez, who set a record with 11 shots taken in a game last night. Hit the woodwork 4 times. I mean, that guy, an absolute enigma. But Jota is what Darwin Nunez isn't. He's really clinical. He's someone who is very, very good at putting the ball away, and he's someone who just seems to flit in between being unavailable and injured to being in the side and performing in a way that you don't really see many players do that. Like, he doesn't seem to need to get up to speed. He's very dependable. He's reliable. He's kind of the perfect person to have as an option, especially in the system that Liverpool play, where he can play through the middle, he can play off the right, he can probably play off the left at a push too. Just such a clever signing. And after Darwin had missed a few chances last night, no surprise that it was Jota who got the all-important first goal that got Liverpool up and running.
Yeah,
can I give you a great Darwin Nunez stat?
Oh, I like it.
So there have been 528 players who've had a shot in the Premier League this season. Of that 528, if you look at non-penalty goals minus XG, Darwin Nunez ranks 525th. Do you want to have a guess at the 3 players below him? 2 of them are very gettable. One of them, I'd be very impressed.
Is it out players who've scored?
No, players who've had a shot.
Porra, because there was a stat about him.
No, Porra's just is in the he's below 500, but he's above Darwin Nunez. 2 of them are centre forwards, the other one's not.
I mean, I've been up since 3 a.m. 3 days in a row, and I'm not convinced I've 100% understood the question.
Okay, so non-penalty goals, right?
You understand like I'm 5.
Okay, you know goals, and you know goals that don't come from a penalty.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, got it.
If you subtract from that, take away from that the XG. So obviously the higher that is, the more goals you're scoring relative to the goals you've expected to score. The lower that figure is, the fewer. So it's a rough measure of striking efficiency. The 3 players below Darwin Nunez out of the 528 who've had a shot in the Premier League, 2 of them are regular centre forwards for their club. And the other one's Yamoliuk from Brentford, who I wouldn't expect you to get.
Well, him enough.
No.
Good guess though, that, George.
Thank you.
Jesus?
I'd say that even not Jesus. Jesus is 500th, I think.
It wasn't a bad guess.
It's almost like I looked this up for a piece I was doing for the Observer today. Not Rashford, no. Rashford. Like they're sort of, I mean, not quite that stature of player, but not far off. Like they're definitely, you'd say, at the moment they're the main centre forward for their club.
I'm going to reluctantly say, no, it can't be Ollie Watkins.
No.
Nicholas Jackson.
Nicholas Jackson, very good. He's 526th. And the other one is Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
I nearly guessed.
course.
I nearly guessed him before George.
It doesn't count if you nearly guess. You have to actually say it, otherwise I won't know you.
I'm on tenterhooks, Jonathan, because I'm expecting this knock on the door that I was told was coming 5 minutes, and I tried to delay the start of the podcast, and you said, let's just start.
Thank God we didn't wait.
And it's been about 20 minutes, so it's a good job. Jonathan knows best. And we spoke about Klopp leaving Liverpool. In years gone by, the Barcelona job coming up would get clubs a little bit itchy that their manager might leave. But it kind of feels like Arteta's got everything he needs at Arsenal. If Barcelona did come calling for Arteta, do you think he'd be tempted, or do you think he'll stay where he is?
I'd be amazed if he went. I mean, that story came out in Spain. It was no sourcing. It was buried in the third paragraph of the piece, and it was sort of couched in, there's no evidence yet. I mean, I can see why Barcelona would want to link themselves to Arteta. Obviously, he came through La Masia. The fact that he served his apprenticeship with Guardiola, it makes sense from their point of view, but it makes no sense from his point of view. I mean, they're still an absolute basket case of a club. 1.2 billion, 1.3 billion, I think now, euros in debt. Yeah. Lewandowski getting to the end, a squad that's massively unbalanced. All these levers that they've pulled, meaning that the income's not necessarily coming in at the minute. They desperately need to start winning. Enormous pressure. I just don't know why you would leave almost any club to go to Barcelona. I mean, obviously that's not quite true, but if you're in a kind of Champions League club in one of the big 4 or 5 leagues, I don't know why you go there. And at Arsenal, he seems to have pretty much everything he wants, and he is building something. And I mean, whether this season turns out to be better than last season, there's no sense of regress. There's still this sort of sense of progress. So I think it'd be an extraordinary decision to leave. And if it does come down to some sort of emotional attachment, well, he's got that with Arsenal as well. He's spent plenty of time there as a player. So I'd be absolutely flabbergasted if he left.
Yeah,
I mean, if they lose 10 games in a row from now, maybe it's a different story. But assuming their form carries on pretty much as it is,
I agree with you. It was a decent result for Arsenal in the week away at Forest Georgia Ground. They tripped up that last season. To kind of get a couple of victories in a row now for Arsenal, that feels like that's what they needed. Yeah,
it's absolutely what they needed after a difficult run that saw them going from being the most likely challenger to City to seeing Liverpool go past them, and this is their opportunity to put that right. It was a funny game against Forest where they really dominated possession, especially in the first half. I had loads of the ball, but didn't create loads of opportunities. And then when they got ahead, it was Forest who kind of came back into the game and caused them a bit of a stir. Like, it still feels like things aren't quite, if we take the last season and a half at Arsenal, it still feels like right now they certainly aren't the level they were for the majority of last season and for the start of this one. It's a huge game this for them, though, because you really feel like if they are beaten here at home to Liverpool, it's way too early to call it a 2-horse race, but suddenly it is very much, Liverpool who are leading the charge with City trying to kind of reclaim their top spot. However, if Arsenal can get a win here, then that puts them firmly into the mix of the 3. So big game, but yeah, going into it feels to me like Liverpool are on a surer footing right now, even if Arsenal have got a couple of results to put an end to that poor run of losses.
Yeah, I think there'll be a few teams hoping for a draw in this one. And on that subject, what are we going for predictions, Jonathan?
I'm going for a draw, 1-1.
Yeah, I've gone for draw as well, 2-2. George?
2-1 Liverpool.
2-1 to Liverpool. Right, then let's take a break from the actual action, even though we started by talking about everything but football, so we've already kind of had a break. Let's talk about the January transfer window. At the time of recording, it hasn't slammed shut yet. The old window, we know it has a tendency to slam shut at the end of the day. Is there any signings that have caught your eye, Jonathan?
I mean, not really. It's more been... There haven't been many signings. I think it's interesting, and people taking
it's been a tough month
PSR seriously. But if you want to, I'll pick 4 for you. I mean, that'll leave George with absolutely nothing. But I would give you the 4 that are mildly interesting. So Gio Reyna going to Forest. I think him trying to resurrect his career. Sunderland lad, obviously, Gio Reyna.
Yeah, do you know why he's called Gio though, Jonathan?
I don't know.
He's called Gio because he was named after Claudio Reyna's midfield partner at Rangers, Giovanni Van Bronckhorst. Learned that this week. Yeah,
but yeah, I think that should relieve some of the creative pressure on Morgan Gibbs-White at Forest. So that makes sense. Calvin Phillips going to West Ham again. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, if he's going to get in the Euro squad, he's got to play football, and so hopefully he can play and can regain his form. Dragishin going to Spurs. I mean, obviously the biggest fee in the window, the fact he's prefers Spurs to Bayern, I think is interesting. And then Enes Ünal going to Bournemouth, somebody who's been hyped for quite a long time. He's had terrible problems with injuries, and you just hope that he can hit something like the level that's been predicted from over the last decade or so.
He wasn't the striker that Arsenal were linked with a striker.
No, he's been linked with everybody for ages.
Was it him?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, he has been linked to almost every club. He was for basically for a decade. He's been incredibly highly rated, and then just keeps getting injured. So, hopefully, he can be rehabilitated.
Yeah, George, you're feeding off the scraps here now. What have you got for us in the scraps?
Jonathan's kindly left me the two kind of big EFL transfers.
He knows what he's doing.
Very interesting.
He knows what he's doing.
Professional.
Set me up beautifully. I'll have to call my first son Jonathan for that midfield partnership.
I take it back about the scraps, Jonathan. Just creating, just finding the space.
Yeah, I think starting with Morgan Rogers, it's a really interesting signing, this one for Villa, where it's quite rare to see a guy getting bought by a Premier League club off the back of probably reputation and half a good season. Morgan Rogers was initially at West Brom. Manchester City bought him out of West Brom's academy to put into their academy. He had an amazing loan at Lincoln, where looking back, it's no surprise Lincoln got to the playoff final in League One when they had Morgan Rogers on the left wing and Brennan Johnson on the right wing. He then had a very poor loan spell at Bournemouth, where he couldn't get into the side. He then had a poor loan spell had a difficult loan spell last season at Blackpool. And it's just mad if you think that this time last year, Morgan Rogers was playing for Mick McCarthy at Blackpool and struggling to impact games as much. And now he's gone to the Premier League to a side who have type aspirations for 10 million and rising. He is very talented. He is a good physical specimen as well. He's someone who carries the ball well, but is also a good creative passer, plays as number 10, but can carry himself physically. My real concern is that we've seen him for the first time, basically since being at Lincoln, seeing him get consistent minutes for a side in his desired position. He's improved so much in 6 months. So I kind of hate the idea that he's going to be going to a Villa side where he's not going to get as much time on the ball. He's going to spend a lot of time sitting on the bench. And I really worry that in the same way that we saw Jack Clark, when Jack Clark came in to Spurs from Leeds, to an extent Fabio Carvalho as well, where these are guys who need to play football, and it's no slight on them if they're not quite good enough to get into a top-end Premier League side. And I worry that Rodgers might be one of those that we'll see get loaned out to the Championship again next season, having struggled to make a real impact. On the other hand, you've got Adam Wharton, who's gone from Blackburn to Crystal Palace, and this is an unbelievable signing. He is... him and Adam Scott were quite clearly the two proper elite talents in the Championship last season. Wharton I'm
going to have to correct you and say it's Alex Scott, George. I don't like to correct you on EFL.
What did I say?
Adam Scott.
Adam.
Yeah, the actor.
Yeah, it's because
from Severance.
It's the golfer. It's the golfer. Not the actor. Masters champion in 2013. It's
Australian belly putter.
Adam Wharton. Exactly. Yeah, couldn't putt. Now he's quite a good putter. It's also because they're Adam Wharton, so Abe was on my mind. But yeah, Wharton, he's just a complete Rolls Royce of a central midfielder. So good on the ball, really has all the technical capacity to dominate the game. He had an interview a couple of weeks ago where he said that Busquets and Rodri were his two kind of icons in the way that they play. He's got a bit of work to do from a kind of out of possession standpoint in terms of winning the ball back but he is that vein of just real quality ball player who can keep the tempo ticking along, has a brilliant range of passing, very tenacious. He will, if he stays fit, he will play for England. He'll play a lot for England. And Palace, having signed Berriese, having signed Michael Olise, and even Mark Gahey, who obviously came from Chelsea but has shown what he could do at the Championship with Swansea. They're just doing what other teams don't seem willing to do, and they're cherry-picking the best EFL talent, the best Championship talent, who will go on to play at the very top level.
I mean, correcting George Elek on EFL, you'll find me on the Not the Top 20 podcast next week instead of George.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Hosting with Ali Maxwell. Watch out for that new job for me.
Does that mean I get a week off?
No time for week off. You've got to get back to your transfer war room, George. No time for weeks off when you've got a war room in your house. Yeah, I think that covers the January window.
The window will be closed next week.
Oh yeah, we won't. Yeah, true. Is it closed everywhere? Yeah, it will be. Well, I should know that as I've been working in transfers all month. It has been.
Is it closed in Saudi Arabia?
Shut yesterday. Tuesday. Tuesday shut in Saudi Arabia because Almiron played in the game.
I think Sweden is still open.
Sweden, yeah, could get a move. Could be some moves in Sweden. But I think that probably covers the January transfer window then. It's time then for our predictions this game week then, and we'll start with Everton against Tottenham. George, what are you going for?
2-1 Spurs.
2-1 to Spurs. Jonathan?
1-1.
1-1. I've gone for 3-1 to Tottenham. Brighton against Crystal Palace, the M23 derby, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's M23. Jonathan?
1-0 to Brighton.
1-0 to Brighton. I've gone for 2-0 to Brighton. George?
2-2.
2-2. What a result that was for Luton against Brighton, by the way. The other night, big game at the bottom, it feels. Burnley against Fulham. I've gone for 1-0 to Burnley. Not sure what I've based that on at all. George?
I've gone for 2-1 to Burnley. What are we saying?
I've based it on knowledge. Jonathan?
I've gone 1-0 to Fulham.
1-0 to Fulham. Oh, nice little spread there. Newcastle against Luton. Jonathan?
2-0 to Newcastle.
2-0 to Newcastle. George?
1-1.
I've got for 1-1 as well, George. Great minds think alike. Sheffield United against Aston Villa. Villa got a terrible record at Bramall Lane. George, what have you gone for?
3-1 Villa.
3-1 Villa. I've gone 2-1 to Villa. Jonathan?
Also 2-1 to Villa.
2-1 to Villa. Inexplicably chose for a 5:30 television kickoff, and who knows why. Like the home game was on a Friday night as well. Why did this game keep getting picked for television? Bournemouth against Nottingham Forest. Jonathan?
2-1 to Bournemouth.
2-1 to Bournemouth. I've gone for 3-1 to Bournemouth. George?
2-1 Bournemouth.
2-1 Bournemouth. Of course, there's a dog barking outside to set the dog downstairs. Is that coming through?
Yeah.
Chelsea against Wolves. George?
1-1.
I've got George. I've gone for 1-1 as well. Jonathan?
I've gone 1-0 to Chelsea.
1-0 to Chelsea. Manchester United against West Ham, please, Jonathan.
2-1 to Manchester United.
2-1 Manchester United. I've gone exactly the same. 2-1 to Manchester United. George?
1-1.
1-1. And then, of course, we've already done Arsenal against Liverpool, and we're about to cover Brentford against Manchester City. So you'll get to hear our predictions at the end of that segment. George, then, Brentford against Manchester City. Ivan Toney, 2-2. What have you made of his return?
Superb. Looks like he's never been gone. Amazing to see him get back. And looked so good straight away. I think he's going to play a big part for Brentford for the rest of the season, because Luton's improved form is really bad news for the likes of Forest, for Everton, for Brentford. But with Toney back in the side, it kind of feels unlikely that they're not going to pick up a little bit, even if they weren't able to get the win in midweek. So yeah, it's impressive to see how well he's doing, and it's also big for the Euros, I think, because Toney needs to hit the ground running if he wants to be Harry Kane's understudy, and if he carries on the way he started, then there's no doubt that he should be.
And what do you make of the strike partnership, Jonathan, of Toney and Maupay? Honestly, Maupay had an eventful night last night against Tottenham. He's a strange bloke, isn't he, Maupay? But what do you make of that as a partnership? Because actually, in fairness to Maupay, he has found his scoring boots again this season. Yeah,
I mean, he scores goals for Brentford in a way he's never managed to score them for anybody else. But it looks good. I was at that game when Brentford beat Forest. Toney's return. I mean, astonishing atmosphere. The sort of the weird sort of wrestling style promo video they put on the big screen and everything. But it worked. It paid off. And it's not just Toney's finishing; it's his approach play, the way he drops deep, the way he's very good at turning with the ball and spreading it wide. Yeah, he was involved in everything good. And Maupay, I think, is a good foil for him because he works so hard. And the fact he now, as well as being just sort of an irritant who runs defenders ragged, that goal he scored against Forest was a great goal. It sort of got lost in the Toney story, understandably enough, but it was an absolutely brilliant finish. The touch before the finish as well. So it works very well. So Wissa is still at the Cup of Nations because DRC, despite not winning a game yet, are still in it. And Mbeumo, who's also actually very low down that list we talked about before. I think he's in the 520s. But yeah, the fact he's injured, it doesn't really matter at the minute. Maupay and Toney, I think, will be the first choice anyway.
I'd like to advocate that we start a new podcast called Jonathan Wilson's Lists, to make lists of things and then discuss them for an hour. I really feel that.
I mean, what a podcast that would be.
Oh my God, this dog. Brentford are currently 4 points clear of relegation, George, but next fixtures coming up look pretty tough. City, Liverpool, City again, and Chelsea. So, although things feel better with Toney there, they've still got to be wary of relegation, haven't they?
They definitely do, especially with Luton and the form that they're in. They're currently 4 points clear of the drop, and Luton are out of it. So that it seems strange to be living in an era where Brentford can be considered too good to go down, but it does kind of feel like there's a bit of a complacency around the chances of them doing so. And when you look at the betting odds, that's reflected there as well, where Luton are heavily odds on Forest to 7-4 for relegation, and Forest are only on 2 points fewer than Brentford, whereas Brentford are 13-1 to go down. As we say, the return of Toney should mean they are better in the second half of the season, and they should be okay. But there's no denying that given the fixtures they've got in the coming weeks, it might get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, and we spoke about Liverpool's academy earlier on in the show, Jonathan. Let's talk about Manchester City's academy here, because Cole Palmer's gone to Chelsea in the summer. Oscar Bobb's just seamlessly come in and taken his place in the squad, but actually looks like he could be primed to make more of an impact at City than Cole Palmer did.
Yeah, I think City must have known what they had before they let Palmer go. From what I heard, City seemed relatively happy about selling him. I think they would have kept him, and it was Palmer pushing to get regular first team football, but precipitated the move. But I don't think City were too unhappy about it, and I think partly they probably thought, well, getting in 45 million was it, is good money for a player who's not proven at Premier League level for all his obvious talent. They must have known what a talent Oscar Bobb is to step in. So I think that looks like one of those moves where City done pretty well out of it. Chelsea looked to have done pretty well out of it, and Cole Palmer's presumably done pretty well out of it financially, and now he's getting the regular football that might get him a spot in the Euro squad.
The City juggernaut seems to be clicking into gear as well all of a sudden, doesn't it, George? As I think most people predicted it would. Haaland now back, Kevin De Bruyne back as well, like he's never been away, made such an impact in that last game against Newcastle. Jonathan Wilson-esque haircut for Kevin De Bruyne as well, albeit a little bit longer, but City have really clicked into gear now, haven't they?
Yeah, they're looking really good. As we say, with De Bruyne back, it gives them a completely different dimension. I also kind of think that his absence meant that we saw certain players take on roles that we hadn't seen them before, and that's put them in a good position. Where you look at the way they set up on Wednesday night, and the role that Foden was able to play as being a bit more of a creator. Like it feels like they're in their element, and the fact that they can play Julian Alvarez up front and basically rest or even drop Erling Haaland without much concern just shows how strong they are. So they've still got a bit of work to do. They are currently 5 points behind Liverpool, albeit with the game in hand. But the wobble that we saw earlier in the season feels like a distant memory now.
So that's it for this week's edition of the Edge of the Box podcast. Don't forget to check out Ultimate Fan if you are interested in that, and thanks to them for sponsoring the show. We'll be back next week to preview all the weekend's Premier League action, as we always do. But if you want to know when the pod is coming out, then subscribe wherever you get your podcast with your post notification on, and you know exactly when the next episode of Edge of the Box is out. Comment on this, like wherever you get your podcast as well. All these things help the podcast grow. Thanks ever so much for watching, and tell all your friends and family about the pod.